Today, I'm in a backyard in New Mexico with...
Hi, I'm Matthew Cuba. I'm an archaeologist in southern New Mexico for the last 20 years, and I think we're gonna do some flint napping today.
Yeah, it's gonna be something I've never done before. You guys will probably get some opportunity to laugh at me and my lack of ability in doing it, but I understand Matt is a good teacher. He's gonna try to set me up for success. Okay, Matthew's gonna show us the tools of the trade right now.
The tools are surprisingly simple and basic. A hammer stone and a antler billet. And then I have an abrading stone. And these are my main tools. I use these tools for probably 75 to 80% of the actual flint napping that I do. Safety first. I wear a glove because I got tired of cutting myself. So especially starting out, it makes me feel better when other people wear a glove.
I'll happily wear a glove.
And then a piece of leather to lay over your leg, and obviously eye protection, you know, if you're worried about it, but otherwise just keep an eye out on things, and when in doubt, just stop.
That's probably good advice for a lot of things in life, don't you think? Lately, I've been on the go a lot. Having to work in bizarre places, surrounded by bizarre people. Having to be online in public places like this used to sketch me out. On public Wi-Fi, you never know who might be trying to steal your personal information. But with Surfshark, I don't worry about it any longer. Surfshark includes a VPN, which basically makes you invisible to anyone else online. This protects you from potential hackers and also makes it much harder for those pesky data brokers to track you and sell your information. But Surfshark offers a lot more than just protection. Because your location and identity is hidden online, it can unlock content that otherwise wouldn't be available in your location. You might be surprised at what's available that you never knew about. There's no risk in trying Surfshark because they offer a 30-day money-back guarantee. If you want to explore the possible benefits of using a VPN, go to surfshark.com/desert for 4 extra months of Surfshark. Okay, so this is what you're starting with here, Matthew?
A chunk of chert from Central Texas. I'm gonna start with my hammer stone, and I'm looking to drive large flakes off that I can then modify and thin down into bifaces and projectile points.
And what's the difference between a biface and a projectile point?
A projectile point is a finish tool. A biface basically means it's been worked on both faces. You need to get to the bifacial stage first, then you progress into a projectile point, and that's where you finish, generically speaking. Here we have a rock, and there are basically 3 rules. The first rule is you want the angle to be less than 90. If it was more than 90, you would not have a good platform to start your flake detachment.
Now, so which angle are we?
This face to this face.
Gotcha.
And it's just less than 90. Secondly, you need this face to be convex, not concave. You don't want it to dish the other way. Because when you strike, if it's concave, you just take a little bit off. It won't propagate that flake into the larger piece.
Okay.
And I brought my science marker with me today, which...
Now the ancients had those, right?
Yes, yes. The final rule is you want all of your flakes to, your platforms, to be below the imaginary center line of the piece you're working on. The center line of this larger chunk is somewhere in that neighborhood. So I'm clearly well below your imaginary center line. So I should be good to go.
Okay, it's time to get rolling with it.
So all I'm using is a piece of quartzite. So a little flake came off.
Ooh.
And unfortunately, there was a little fracture in the rock from who knows when. So when I detached the flake, it propagated out. You can see where that old fracture is right here. Right now we have lumps and bumps, and we need to get rid of that as we slowly work our way down towards a flat piece. So if I remove that, then what's my next step? Here, I might just try to take off some of this to work on kind of cutting down the square edge a little bit.
So in what instances do you use the antler versus the hammerstone?
So I prefer to use antler when I'm starting to get down to the finer stages of your biface, because I have more control with my antler than I do with my hammerstone.
Okay.
There we go. And that wasn't pretty, but took off that high spot. You can see that there's still a little bit of a flaw there, but as we're thinning this into a smaller biface that's so close to the edge that as you go, it's gonna disappear. Once again, back of my wrist, inside of my knee. There we go. The flake broke, but it ran down that ridge, getting rid of that step fracture. Problem solved.
Okay, now it's my turn to give this thing a go. You guys can't laugh. Matthew has set me up with a beginner-friendly piece of rock. There's only one little square section here, and so it should be an easier piece to learn with. So let's give it a shot.
You want it just the very tip. And so when in doubt, you'd almost rather miss than hit too far.
Hit too much.
Yeah, and so play with the angle. If you miss, you'd rather miss short than long.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Uh-huh.
Oh, you're gonna have to hit it harder than that now. There you go.
Whoa, look at that. That's perfect, right?
Yeah, look where the dashed lines are.
Yeah.
And you met your hinge fracture and you cleaned it up.
So Matthew was just telling me about two of his kids. They're young, 3 and 6. And I was like, it got me thinking, okay, how old were people generally when they started Flint Knapping back in the day? And then also, I've always assumed that the men always did it. But Matthew was gonna say, no, not so fast. So I thought you guys might enjoy this as well.
I mean, we can't go back in time and observe, but everybody used stone tools. Why would women wait for you to come back from whatever task you were doing to make a tool for them? I mean, they are just as capable, if not more capable. There was obviously people that were better at it than others, but everybody did it. Everybody had a working knowledge of working stone.
Yeah, how to do it.
Yeah, because you look at some of these small flakes, they're incredibly sharp. You could use those for cutting vegetation, for cutting meat, for cutting leather, for hide, and that's all they did. They just grabbed a sharp flake, used it. Once they were done with it, tossed it down. But anybody can make a flake.
Yeah.
You don't need to wait for just the men or just these people or, like I've noticed with my kids, they want to do what you're doing. So why wouldn't kids be flint napping? It's a skill they need to survive in life. I want to pass those life skills on to my kids. And if we were living a prehistoric lifestyle, this would be a big one, is working stone. So I think everybody flint napped. Can you discern that in the archaeological record? This is the Swiss Army knife of the prehistoric world.
Yeah.
Everybody needs a Swiss Army knife.
Totally.
So yeah, I think everybody flint napped, and certainly kids flint napped. Why wouldn't they? Sorry, so this is my pressure flaker. Prehistorically, you could have used long antler tines, bone, even hardwood. I live in the desert, so antler and decent examples of fresh bone are hard to come by. So we went to the modern equivalent, and it's just it's got a little bit of flex into it, and then it's just got a copper tip, and that's just rough enough to where it will grip on the stone. And so you could use, for the longest time, I used a piece of hardwood as a pad just to keep the flakes from shooting into the palm of my hand. But this is an old section of tire with a piece of metal on the back, so it's rigid. Basically, all my upper body is doing is supporting the pressure flaker and the piece I'm working on, and the power to drive that pressure flake off comes from my legs. I basically want to take this edge off so that I have a platform to go that way. So I just put the pressure flaker on right there, and all I'm doing is holding all it did was remove just a couple little small flakes, but it was right exactly where I needed them.
Huh. So that's your precision instrument there.
Yes, and I mean, I'm a big guy. I've got a lot of upper body strength, but I have way more lower body strength. I now have a platform, switch back to my percussion to hopefully take out that high spot. So there we go.
Nice.
It would have been hard to really get that platform in there unless I had used that pressure flaker. And this will be used extensively at the end when you're finishing your projectile point. So now I'm hoping to take out some of this mass. Got it up in there a little bit. But now we have a whole series of little platforms along the margins here. There we go. So That almost went the entire width of that objective piece. We'll sacrifice this little edge over here under my fingers to get this larger biface. And around here, southern New Mexico, that's pretty standard size projectile point.
That you'll find.
Yeah.
And does that vary time period? You know,
Absolutely.
we're talking...
You know, generally when you're talking about Paleo-Indian, they're a little bit larger, and early archaic points are large, middle archaic points start to get a little smaller. This is general trends, not, you know, you can get into different situations where you have very small Paleo-Indian points, very small early arch, but generally speaking, they get smaller as you get earlier or younger in time.
That's because the game they were hunting
Or
is generally smaller?
Generally, I mean, Paleo-Indian times you had megafauna.
Yeah.
And, you know, so it was a very different world. But as you go through time, I think that not that people lose napping ability, but it's not necessary for them to invest so much effort into these big, large points. You know, a smaller point does just as well. Why invest that energy? You know, your culture group's eyes, what constitutes a projectile point? What group you live in and culture that you exist in, you may have a very different idea of what constitutes a projectile point than the group I live in. So my group may say, we want a point that's like this, and that is a projectile point, whereas the culture you live in says, no. This is what a projectile point looks like. So there's a mental template there, because these are the disposable portions of your toolkit. It's a lot harder to make foreshafts, to make bows, to make atlatls, than it is to make the stone tips. So you want the projectile points to match the other equipment that's in your toolkit for hunting. You don't want to have to recreate your bow or your atlatl every time you make a new point. You want that point to fit everything else. Because this is the easy part.
It's obvious, but just to state, a spear point is going to be a lot different than a point you're going to put onto an arrow shaft.
Yes, and a lot of the sites you go to, you find the very small, delicate arrow points. And those are clearly associated with the use of the bow and arrow. Whereas you get a little bit further back into archaic times, and you're working with dart points. You know, a little bit larger, they're thrown by the atlatl. And so what works for an atlatl won't work for a bow and arrow and vice versa. And so once again, it's that mental template. What constitutes a projectile point in your culture? And clearly, because of the multitude of projectile point styles in the world, they're not all the same.
Yeah, people have different opinions and uses and needs.
But it's all tied to what is a projectile point. And it's a subjective thing. It's not pan world, it's not even pan region, it's subjective. Your culture says this shape is a projectile point. So you make a projectile point in that shape. So now you've got a really good platform right here to hopefully come down this ridge and remove some of that material. You know, below your center line, less than 90, real nice convexity. So that should be a decent platform to remove some of that material. There you go. Looks like it ended in a little bit of a step fracture maybe a little bit of a hinge fracture, but not a big deal. It's past the medial line of that face. It's pretty smooth and uniform. The edges are sinuous, there's no square edges. So for this stage, in my mind, that's a super respectable biface because you're not really having to, deal with any big problems, so to speak.
Yeah. So, I mean, this still needs to be flattened out.
Yes.
I figured if I hit there, it'll take some of that.
Yeah, but before I did that, I would try this one.
Okay.
Because you've got a ridge there, you've got a really nice platform there. It's down real low. Have you ground it yet?
No.
You don't have to do that one super hard because it's what we call an isolated platform. There's nothing else around it. It's hanging low. It should be the kind of low-hanging fruit. Even out, lower to where it's more horizontal. You're up. There you go.
Definitely becomes harder to secure.
Yes. There you go. And see how it really ate into that thickest part. Ooh. There you go. And there's the flake right over there, and it just ran that high spot.
That's surprising to me that a bigger point is harder to make because for some reason I just would have thought like, okay, when it's small, it's more intricate, but so why is that?
Well, because the larger your biface gets, the larger your projectile point gets, the harder it is to not exert a bending pressure on it. So biface your size is fairly easy to keep level and oriented the direction you want. But as you get bigger, things get increasingly difficult. And so this to me is a fairly normal sized biface, but if that was doubled, it's hard. It gets harder and harder because you're trying to hit these little platforms on the margins. And when you look at the way energy flows in a wave. And if you hit down here on the end, you can get end shock where that energy wave travels like this, and you can break that biface into 4 pieces with one blow.
Wow.
And that's just that energy wave traveling through the rock. And so when I first started out, that was my ideal size biface because it was manageable. And I am not no all be all flint napper. And so to me, that's my comfort zone, you know?
So with this one, what do you think my strategy?
So we're to the point where you need to start thinking about what is my overall shape going to be, you know? And to me, your overall shape's right in here. So you've got this kind of lobe or projection here that, you know, to get a nice uniform preform for a projectile point, you need to get rid of that. But in getting rid of that, you need to think, okay, I still need to get rid of some of the thickness here. So you'll want to come in and we'll cheat it for you here a little bit and just put a really nice platform on there. But
we won't tell the YouTube folks this.
But you know, there's nothing wrong with that because it's all a learning process. So now we've got that platform less than 90 center line. It's in there, but it's below it. That platform's below it, and we have convexity. And really all you want to do is take it from there to meet this really shallow step fracture. That though, we've got a nice platform here already.
All right, what do you guys think? We're coming into some of the final stages. Is it going to become anything, or is it going to be throwaway?
Sounded super promising.
It's a little flake.
Uh-oh. Did you break it? Oh no. So you hit it a little high on the platform. Not a big deal.
Quick progress check with Matthews. Looking pretty good.
And so you earlier brought up notching.
Yeah.
So I figured we'll just go ahead and corner notch this. And notching's super easy. You know, this whole time we've been discussing pushing that platform down below your imaginary center line. So with a notch, all you're doing is flipping the objective piece back and forth, taking flakes off to where the platform is on one face and then the other and then the other back and then to the other and back. And as you do that, you're gonna cut a notch into the piece. And you're really only limited in terms of depth of notches by how deep your pressure flaker is. Because, you know, with this pressure flaker, my notches can be only as deep as basically the length of the copper portion of my pressure flaker, which is plenty deep for a notched projectile point. So I'm thinking a corner notched, you know, kind of a traditional late archaic style point. And so all I'm doing is basically just moving that platform from one edge to the other. And every time you see me flip it over, I've basically moved the platform from one face to the other face.
Wow. All in a day's work, huh? I just wanted same deal with the fat side?
No, so tip it the other way. There you go.
That's what it...
Yeah, and you want to just push in and detach down. And it gets hard once you get into that notch.
Is there any way to flip it or no, I lost?
You lost it a little bit, but hand me that pad real quick. So you almost got it in there. And so what you have to do now is kind of go to the side of it. Yeah,
okay.
There you go.
Matthew helped finalize my piece here. I think we're going hunting. Don't you think so?
For your first time, I think it's amazing. You didn't break it. You thinned it. I mean, we've both found projectile points that look very similar to that in actual archaeological settings. You know?
So what is this, you would call this late archaic style?
That's a for southern New Mexico, that's a late archaic style. Vaguely San Pedro-ish, maybe Tularosa corner notched. It kind of depends on, you know, but it's generic late archaic.
That's cool.
So that was my only goal, was to get you to actually make a point and you did remarkably well.
That's awesome.
I am beyond proud.
Let's be real. If left to my own devices, this point would have ended up as shattered rocks on the tarp. In today's day and age, flint knapping is a novelty, a skill from a bygone era. What I find so fascinating is this was a skill practiced the world over for thousands of years. There is evidence of flint knapping on every continent that's ever seen human habitation. I mean, think about that. This was a human experience that millions of people across thousands of years from diverse cultures and ethnicities all shared in common. How many other things in our world meet that criteria? I'm grateful to Matthew for this experience, and I plan to continue to develop this skill. My hope is that having a finer understanding of it will shed further insight onto my own explorations and discoveries.